Hello, friends. Happy Friday. Welcome back to this Pack-A-Day Live or Pack-A-Day Happy Hour, I guess I should say. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. You can find the podcast at Pack-A-Day Podcast. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being a part of the Pack-A-Day Podcast and joining us every single day. However often you do, you're the absolute best, and I cannot thank you enough for it. We'll get to as many questions as we can over the course of the next about 45 minutes-ish. I do have to head out right around about 3:45 Central Time. In the meantime, any super chats will go to the top of the list. We'll get to as many member questions as we can, but we'll start per usual right at the top. We'll start with Troy's question, who got in here early at 11:35 a.m. this morning. Made sure he got a couple questions in. Last year, X was a potential free agent we kept hearing about that would be a perfect fit for Green Bay. Who are some players that could fit that this year? Is Milton Williams one of them? I think there are a couple things I'll be very transparent about here, Troy. At first glance, I don't think there is a Xavier McKinney for Green Bay in this initial free agency class. I don't think there's a picture. Like if you kind of look at last year's Xavier McKinney, what he hit, right? You're looking at all pro potential, already was a well-established player in this league. Really, really great, talented player who is still 25 years old. Let me see how old he was. Xavier McKinney right now is 26 years old, and he turned 26 in August. So yeah, when they signed him, he was 25 years old. So 25 years old, established player at a huge position of need that fit exactly what their defensive scheme was looking for. I mean, it screamed off of the page of like, okay, our biggest position of need, still in his prime, matches the age of everyone else on the team. All pro caliber player, fits the scheme perfectly. Just everything, every check. It didn't take anyone of any significance or real knowledge to look at Green Bay's biggest needs and what they'd perfectly want and look at Xavier McKinney and be like, oh yeah, that seems to be perfect. I don't think there is that perfect 1A player for Green Bay this year. You look at corner, pass rusher, wide receiver, maybe offensive lineman. Those are their probable biggest needs as they kind of go into this free agency period. There's not a corner, 25, 26 years old, top tier corner, top of the market guy who Green Bay can throw that money at and be like, there, that's perfect. There are some options. Don't get me wrong. DJ Reed, I think he's around 28. Byron Murphy, I think he's still actually like 27, I want to say. But you're not probably talking about, kind of all pro players. You're talking about really good corners who are a little bit older than McKinney was last year. And quite frankly, because they're a premium position and the free agency class isn't that strong this year, probably go for more money than even what Xavier McKinney did last year. So that's not necessarily perfect. You look at some of the top tier, potential pass rushers that are available, somebody like a Josh Sweat, a little bit older than what McKinney was. The beautiful thing about McKinney was he was great against the run, great against the pass, could do a little bit of everything. Josh Sweat, more of a pass rusher and somebody that isn't necessarily as good against the run, hasn't been a premier pass rusher like Xavier McKinney had been, at least close to being a premier safety. Milton Williams, you could have a similar conversation. Pass rusher, not a great run defender, really good player, still in his prime. He has that age checked, and certainly pass rusher, defensive tackle. That's a pretty close one. That's about as close as it gets, but I wouldn't put Milton Williams in the same conversation as a Xavier McKinney or a Josh Jacobs. I would also argue that, again, because he's a premium position, pass rusher, defensive line, you're probably going to have to pay Milton Williams more than even what you paid Xavier McKinney to last year. Wide receiver, you could argue T. Higgins, right? I think 25 years old, top of the line wide receiver, position of need. That's one that you could do a little bit more of being like, oh, okay, that makes sense. First of all, you could end up with a franchise tag in Cincinnati, or just could end up with a contract extension in Cincinnati. May not see the market in the first place. And you're also looking at a probably 30 plus million per year contract on a significant deal, especially if you look at what guys like Calvin Ridley got last year. Like Higgins is going to get a boatload of money. And I just don't really see Green Bay taking almost all of their free agent money and saying, we're just going to give it to T. Higgins. I don't think that's the direction that they're going to want to go to. Trey Smith, the guard for KC, he's going to be one of the probably premium offensive linemen in this draft. You could point to him a little bit. He's got age on his side. He's still younger, super talented, played a lot of good football. He would definitely bring a more mauling physical intensity to that offensive line, and that would be a really good fit. You're probably talking about one of the top 3 free agents in all of football going into this year, and look at some of those really big guard contracts from last year, and you're probably going to surpass that with Trey Smith. And again, that's assuming that KC does not bring him back in some capacity. that again, I don't know that Green Bay is going to want to go in that direction. I also don't know that he's a perfect scheme fit, but he's a hell of a football player. So he's one of those guys that can probably fit everywhere. So the number one thing I'll say transparently is I don't think at first glance that there is that player that I just look at and be like, that's it. That makes all the sense in the world. And to be clear, even when Xavier McKinney made all the sense in the world last year, and they did, of course, eventually get him, there was no guarantee they were going to, right? There was going to be a lot of competition for his services, and the odds that Green Bay got him, we didn't know going in. Thankfully, they did, and he's paid off massively. But even if there is a guy that you identify and be like, this guy makes the most sense, you still have to be able to, win out on the bidding war and have that player actually want to come to Green Bay too, which are things that are not guaranteed. So I don't quite see that 1A player. The other thing that I will be, as I said, there were two things I will be transparent about. I am still in the recapping 2024 phase, which is this week. Tomorrow will be my final grades for this past game. Again, a little bit delayed on it. Ever since holidays and being sick, I've just been a tick off with everything. So my apologies for it being a little bit delayed, but that will be out tomorrow. And then probably Sunday will be kind of a final recap of grades on the season as a whole, who had the highest grades on the year, lowest grades on the year, most improved player. And we'll break it down in a variety of different ways, which is always really fun to look at. So that'll probably be Sunday. Monday, we'll probably take a look at who's going to stay, who's going to leave in free agency from the current Packers team. And then we'll start digging pretty aggressively into free agency, big players that Green Bay could spend money on and things like that. So we'll get to all of that probably next week, and I'll dive into it even further, see if there could be some cap cut casualties that could add to that list that maybe aren't out there right now. And we'll take a deep dive into it. So I do promise you we will get there. I do know, like in the back of my mind, as soon as the season's done, what people immediately want to jump to is free agency and the draft. And I would probably do myself a few favors if I just immediately announced, here's the top 10 free agents Green Bay could sign. If I probably released that on Tuesday instead of the other stuff I've done, probably going to get a few more clicks on that one. I don't know, call me old fashioned, or probably just the easier ways to call me stupid. But I just kind of like having this week to kind of recap everything, put a bow on the entirety of 2024, review everything that happened, kind of take that moment to digest everything. And then next week, start digging into, all right, what happens next? And that will be very much what next week, and really, quite frankly, a huge chunk of January and February are about is kind of taking looks at who they can add, what players make sense, who's going to leave, and those sort of things. And then by the time March rolls around, then you actually get to free agency. And then we talk about players that are off the market, players that Green Bay had that signed elsewhere, maybe a TJ Slayton, something like that, Josh Myers, and then hopefully maybe a couple big names that Green Bay signed as well, or maybe some trades that happen along the way. We'll look at all of it, I promise you, and we will get there in time. Is Joe Barry LaFleur's biggest mistake as head coach? Oh, man. There's certainly an argument to be made there. I'm trying to think if there's anything else massively egregious. The string of special teams coordinators that they've had and not working out so far. I'll put it this way. Coordinators in general has been his biggest Achilles heel. I would very much argue that. I think he got Jeff Hafley right. It's really, really, really difficult to judge Adam Stenavich or even Nathaniel Hackett in any legitimate way, especially Hackett, because it was really Rodgers running the show on the field, LaFleur putting his offense in, LaFleur calling the plays. Like, I know Hackett had a lot of red zone stuff, but like, it was really difficult to evaluate him. But I'll say Hackett, Stenavich, Pettin, Barry, Hafley obviously looks great so far. So that one, they look like they got right. And then Menenga, Drayton, and Bisaccia, that group on the whole, I mean, you could probably make an argument that, the real only one that looks like a true difference maker of that 8 so far is Jeff Hafley. So I would say, personally, if there is a major flaw that's kind of shown itself, it's his ability to find proper coordinators in all phases. And again, offensively with Hackett and Steno, I'm willing to give a bit more of, I just have no idea. I don't exactly know how to evaluate those when it's really Matt LaFleur and his offense and him calling the plays. But certainly defense and special teams with 6 names in that group, only Jeff Hafley looks, like he's the real deal. And that is a little bit of a problem for sure. I missed out on getting 1 years ago, so I have a Devontae Adams jersey in my eBay cart ready to go for March. I was talking to Perry Goldstein about this on Packs what she said, because she's a little bit bummed out that she's got a Jaire jersey. And this is why I say always get players that are retired or done. Like once they're done, then it's the time to get their jersey. So once you kind of have a feel for who they are as a person, and like now's a great time to get a Charles Woodson jersey. Now's a great time to get a Nick Collins jersey. Now's a great time to get a Tremont Williams or a Antonio Freeman or like whomever, right? Like go get those, because you know they're not going to go anywhere. You know they're not going to change teams. You know that there's not going to be a trade next week. So I'm not a jersey guy in general. I don't care if you're a jersey guy or not a jersey guy. It doesn't matter to me. Do you. But I'm not a jersey guy. But if I were, I would be living in the Nick Collins, Tremont Williams, Charles Woodson, those type of jerseys. I think James Jones would be a cool jersey to have. There's a variety of them. I think that would be fun, but it's all, kind of former players, once you know who they are, what they've done, that they're not going to another team, those sort of things. That's where I'm at with it. So maybe even wait until Adams retires, and then Devontae Adams Green Bay jersey becomes even cooler, in my opinion. I was very close. Adams, I want to say is a couple of years, like there was I don't know if it was like a game worn or like it wasn't a game worn. It was like a official Devontae Adams jersey, and it looked just awesome. And I'm like, that looks so cool. And I was very close to being like, screw it, I'm just going to get it. But I did not. But yeah, that's going to be a good one way or the other. You have to trade a starter. You have to trade a starter getting, say, 60% snaps, not named Jaire. Who would it be? Why, to who, and for what compensation? All right, let's take a look at this here. By team, I want to look at who's played enough snaps. So we're going to go on offense first. So total snaps. So they played about 1,100 snaps. I'm going to say anyone that's played 600 snaps or more on offense. So your options would be Wicks, Dobbs, Jacobs, Reed, Love, Kraft, Ryan, Myers, Jenkins, Tom, or Rasheed Walker. That's a really brutal on offense. I don't think I'm going to go anyone on offense. I'm going to go to the defensive side of the ball. And so they played a total of 1,100 snaps. So again, we'll say anyone that's played 600 or more is fair. So the only players that meet that criteria are Carrington Valentine, Rashawn Gary, Kenny Clark, McDuffie's a free agent, Quay Walker, Javon Bullard, Keyshawn Nixon, Xavier McKinney. Okay, so we don't have a ton of great options in this list. Man, who am I trading from that group? Now I'm almost having to go back to the offense. Okay, I know my answer. I am going to trade of that group of 600 or more snaps. I'm going to trade Romeo Dobbs. I'm going to trade Romeo Dobbs away. I don't love any of the other ones. I don't think you get much. I think you probably get a day 3 selection. I'm okay with that. I think almost in a way you need to open up snaps at wide receiver. And I haven't seen enough of Dobbs. He was unhappy at some point this last season. He didn't evolve. He's a free agent in 2026. And I think I can get a day 3 selection for him, maybe even a fourth rounder, I'll say. I'm gonna trade Romeo Dobbs away. I also has had a couple head injuries, which gives me a little bit of nervousness. That's probably of that group of those parameters. I'm gonna say it's gonna be Romeo Dobbs. And then to me, that opens up the opportunity to go get a top tier wide receiver, hopefully. We'll just put Devontae Adams in there for the time being, just for funsies. Say Devontae Adams. And then you can probably, eventually, hopefully at the end of the year, get to Christian Watson on that outside. But in the meantime, I'll go Adams and Wicks on the outside with Jaden Reed in the slot, probably drafting somebody in the first 4 rounds as well that's going to compete there. You still have Melton and Heathen as sort of your 5 and your 6. And then Tucker Kraft, Luke Musgrave at tight end, and Josh Jacobs at running back. That's the direction that I'm going to go. I'm going to open up that spot at wide receiver. I'm going to go and get a primary wide receiver at some point. I'll get the 4th, 5th round pick in return for Dobbs. Get ahead of it now before he's a free agent and I lose him, and just get a comp pick in like 2027 in return. That's the direction I'll go in there. Good question, though. Really good question. I personally go Rasheed Walker. He's a good player. I like him. His story, but he seems small for a left tackle and not a great run blocker. And it's about to get paid. I'd probably trade him for the Pats for 2nd and 4th. I can promise you, if you could sign me up to get a 2nd round pick and a 4th and a 5th rounder for Rasheed Walker, I would jump on that, as would the Green Bay Packers. You probably get just the 4th or the 5th for Rasheed Walker, a average-ish, solid, okay starting offensive tackle that can be a good enough guy to be a starter. But that you're going to have to pay soon, has 1 year left of being a cheap-ish starter. I think you're probably looking at closer to like a 4th or 5th round pick in return. If you could get a 2nd and a 4th for that, then yes, you immediately take that. I do not see that would be what Rasheed Walker would get. The other thing I would add too is if you're not going to get that return, then you're, more often than not, you're better to keep offensive linemen. It sounds great to like, oh, this guy's not that great. There's not a lot of great offensive linemen. So you almost have to change your evaluation. I know Philly, Detroit, some of those teams have really good offensive lines. Man, it all sounds good until you've got Travis Glover or Kadeem Telford in there, right? And your offensive line just disintegrates in front of your eyes. Imagine that, you trade Rasheed Walker away, and now all of a sudden Jordan Morgan and somebody else go out for the season, and now you have a full season of Jacob Monk or Kadeem Telford or Travis Glover. Man, it sounds good on the surface of like picking up some draft picks maybe in return, until you have to go through, and we've seen it before, Byron Bell, Kyle Murphy, Alex Light, until Travis Glover this past game, Kadeem Telford, and all of a sudden in a big game where you've got to try to block some really talented pass rushers with some very not talented or not, at least mature, complete players yet, along the offensive line, and it ends up being nightmare fest. So no, I would not trade Rasheed Walker away, nor do I think you get that type of return for him. Do you have anyone you would like to see get the D-line job? Also, do you think it is the right move to move on from Rebrovich? I will say one more time that the assistant coaches, or like, is Ed Policy going to be good? Those are always inherently the hardest questions for me to answer. It's, we get to go through the all-22 tape and watch players and evaluate it to the best of our ability and talk about it on a week-to-week basis. And I love doing that stuff. That in and of itself is hard enough to critique and do all of those sort of things. When we don't really have any visibility into what's being said, what's being done, how players are reacting to coaches and those sort of things, it makes it a near impossibility to really evaluate what Jason Rebrovich does. How I look at it for assistant head coaches is, all right, what were my expectations for a certain group going into the season? How many players exceeded those expectations? How many met those expectations? And how many fell short of those expectations? And for the defensive line as a whole, I would argue Kenny Clark fell short. TJ Slayton was about at my expectations. I would say Devontae Wyatt fell a little bit short. I would say Carl Brooks fell short. I would say Colby Wooden fell short. So that's not a great start. I would say Rashawn Gary fell well short. I would say LVN fell short. I would say Preston Smith, up until the point he was traded, fell far short of expectations. I would say Enagbare fell very far short of expectations. And maybe the only player of the entire group that exceeded expectations was Brenton Cox. That's not good enough. That's not good enough. How much of that was Jason Rebrovich? I could not tell you. I could not look you in the eye and say for certain it was Jason Rebrovich. But when you have multitude of players along that defensive front underachieving, only a couple that are achieving, and maybe one in Brenton Cox that's overachieving, that is probably what ultimately does it, right? I have heard some things that, people were not exactly excited when he got that promotion, felt he was not ready for it. And I have not seen a defensive line that has made any sort of significant jump. Although I will, to his defense, say I thought a lot of those players that I just mentioned made a pretty significant jump in run defense this past year. So that should be noted. But if there was one coach that I thought Green Bay probably should and or would move on from, it was Rebrovich, and that clearly did happen. As far as who would get that job, I don't have any names off the top of my head. I know they're interviewing that guy that was on the Jets defensive line as their head coach, or defensive line coach, I should say. He seems like a good candidate, but I haven't looked at it all that much and don't have necessarily a dog in the fight at this point. How would you feel about a free agency of Malcolm Kuntz, DJ Reed, and Devontae Adams? It sounds good on paper. Kuntz is obviously coming off of injury. DJ Reed's coming off his best season. And Devontae Adams is a little bit older. This is one of those where I'm more like, I loved what they did, especially with Xavier McKinney last year. Like, that is when you get the opportunity to make a big time free agent signing, like, go out and do it. I wish there was that player that made that sort of sense this year for Green Bay. And again, I'm not sure that there is. This would be a ton of money to spend. You're going to get it for Malcolm Kuntz, who is going to be a good pass rusher who's going to help your team. I don't know that he brings it to this entirely different level, which then you have to understand, like, is that the money that you want to spend on that type of player? I think DJ Reed improves the secondary. Do I think he brings it to an entirely different level? No, I'm not so sure that that's the case. Again, do you want to spend that much money on that? Like, is he a Pro Bowler? Is he an all-pro player? I don't think Kuntz or DJ Reed are. Now, Devontae Adams could be. He still makes a lot of sense for all the reasons that we've kind of talked about over the last couple of days. But again, older player, how much of the ball does he want? Is he going to get frustrated if there's those days like Romeo Doubs have had that maybe only a few targets come his way? What type of contract is he looking for? Things like that. I think this would be probably too much money to spend on non-Pro Bowl / all-pro players. Although, again, we know Devontae has that ability. It's just how much longer is he going to have it and how much are you going to have to pay for it? I'm for signing Devontae. Let me just put that out there. But, if you told me that Green Bay added Malcolm Kuntz, DJ Reed, and Devontae Adams to this roster, I would say the roster is very clearly improved. It got better, and they took a step in a positive direction. I do not believe you would probably get the ROI that you would be hoping for by spending a huge amount of money on those 3 players in free agency. Do coaches' contracts affect the salary cap, or is it their own thing? It is their own thing. You can spend as much as you want on coaches, and there is no salary cap for that whatsoever. Hey, Andy, hope you're doing well. Do you think the Packers might be interested in Khalil Mack as an edge rushing option? I know he's old, but I'm thinking Julius Peppers type signing. I would not rule it out. Now, Khalil Mack has to decide if he wants to play first. We know that Green Bay had interest in Khalil Mack when he was when the Bears traded for him, I should say. And then, we have seen it, to your point, like a Julius Peppers, if somebody's a premier player, even if they're still getting older, and even, again, Khalil Mack's not Reggie White, but Goody brought up Reggie White of like, hey, he was over 30, but he was not towards the end of his career. They would potentially be interested in that. Khalil Mack was still playing at an unbelievable level this past season. You might need to use him a little bit more in a pass rush role, but this is a, 116 sack player in his career, still at a 90.2 PFF grade this past year. Yes, I think if Khalil Mack became available at the right price and wanted to play in Green Bay and decided to play again this year, I do think Green Bay would have interest in Khalil Mack. He'll be 34 years old in February. So old, but still playing at a high level. It would depend on the cost, but it wouldn't completely shock me if Green Bay was interested in that. Alex, I'm on my way to CubsCon where fans can meet players, get autographs, attend press conference type sessions, and play games. Would be cool if the Packers started doing something like that. It would be. They used to have that, Packers Fan Fest and some other things, and just don't do that stuff anymore. I do wish there was a little bit more stuff like that for Packers fans. Especially for a team that's owned by the fans and things like that. I do wish they did a little bit more, but unfortunately they do not. Miranda, thanks for all you do, Andy. Looking forward to the offseason content and what plays out for the Pack. Me too, Miranda. This is always a fun time of year. I wish that we were breaking down Packers Lions instead, but there is a lot to go over. There's a lot to discuss. It never stops. It's 365 days a year, which is why we do it that way. And I am really geeked out to start looking at free agents, at draft prospects, at who they could sign, who they bring in as quarterbacks coach and defensive lines coach. Any other changes that they may potentially make, or if Jeff Hafley gets hired away, God forbid, something like that happens. I think there's going to be a lot to discuss, and I'm really, 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 really excited to kind of sink my teeth into it and get kind of to the bottom of all of it, quite frankly. Man, I hope we don't lose Hafley. I don't think we will. When have the Jets done anything that would be smart, right? So, hiring Jeff Hafley would be smart. So there's like a 0% chance that the Jets would actually do it. But I think he'll be back. I think this is probably like the introduction to Jeff Hafley to the NFL and the interview phase and things like that. But I will say this. Would it stun you if Jeff Hafley went and completely blew them away? It certainly would not stun me. He's a super impressive dude. He's very charismatic. He knows how to talk. He knows how to lead. He knows how to look you in the eye and tell you what you need to hear. He knows how to coach. He's got previous head coaching experience at Boston College. He's got obviously NFL experience now, being a really successful defensive coordinator. Do I think he could put together a team? Yes. So it wouldn't stun me if he blew away the Jets, but I don't expect him to be the head coach. I do. If I were betting today, I think he'll be back as defensive coordinator this year. Andy, the free agent class this year is not as good as last year. Still think the Packers could get a lot of potential adding a Trey Smith or Drew Dahlman. Thoughts on those potential additions? Yeah, we talked about Trey Smith a little bit. I do kind of live in that world where if you're looking kind of for a premium player that does make some sense, these are two names that I do really think could be really solid additions to this team. I am not convinced that Green Bay is unconvinced that they don't have 5 guys already that can start. I have a feeling that the Packers feel very confident going, whether they should or not, very confident going into next year with Rasheed Walker, Elton Jenkins, Sean Ryan, Jordan Morgan, and Zach Tom in some makeup. I don't know who necessarily starts where, but I think in some makeup, they feel very comfortable going into next year with those 5 guys. There's still the potential that they bring Josh Myers back. They have some young guys that they're going to want to see if they can take a step this year. And I would expect about 3 offensive linemen drafted, at least 2, if not 3 offensive linemen drafted, which one of the things that they do best as a franchise in their history is draft and develop offensive linemen. That's something they've been very, very good at. So I'm not convinced that Green Bay thinks that they need a major upgrade on the offensive line. And if they're not 100% sure that they need that, they're certainly not going to go and spend top of the market offensive line money on somebody like a Trey Smith or a Drew Dahlman. I'm more of the mind that I think if you really want to improve the offense, make the offensive line better. The offensive line, or at least provide competition there. The offensive line gets better. Josh Jacobs is going to be better. Josh Jacobs gets better. I know this isn't necessarily always the case, but usually, to some extent, play action is better. Offensive line is better. Jordan Love has more time, has more comfortability stepping up in the pocket, making his big time throws, which is in turn going to give the wide receivers a bit more time. And hopefully Love is more on time and accurate, which is going to make those wide receivers better inherently. Usually you're better off adding to the offensive line and improving that group than you are maybe adding even a player the caliber of Davante Adams. A lot of times those offensive linemen, when they're really good, especially, can be force multipliers for the entirety of your offense. I think that's what some of these guys, specifically like a Trey Smith, would do. But I don't necessarily see Green Bay going in that direction, but it does very much intrigue me. BPA, we're talking BPA already. Are you asking me, or are you telling me that's what they'll do? That is probably what they'll do come draft time. As far as best player available, whether it's via free agency or the draft, time will tell. And again, we'll go over that soon. There isn't any elite or game-changing player out there at a position of need. Would it be better to save that money? Yes and no. I think that, excuse me, I think that you have to be cognizant of when to spend those big free agent dollars. And I'm usually the believer that when you want to go spend it on premium players. That's usually what you kind of want to do. And again, I don't know that there's a perfect fit for that this year, but that's kind of why I look at somebody like a Davante Adams, right? A Davante Adams is going to cost a decent chunk of money, but you are not giving him a 4-year, 120 or 5-year, $150 million, something like that, like a T. Higgins might get, right? You're probably looking at closer to like a 2-year, $40 million deal. And I think if there isn't that A1 premium player, and again, I'm guessing they're not going to bring back Davante Adams. I don't think it's impossible, but my guess is that they won't. But if you're looking at something like that, yes, you are still spending a good chunk of money, but there's probably a little bit less guaranteed. You can probably get out of some of it in 2026 if you really needed to. And you're not, again, giving that 4 or 5 year deal. It's not something that you're tying, again, 100+ million into. You're probably tying closer to like 60, 70 million into for sure. And I think, sorry, not even that, sorry, 30-ish million into 30, 40 million over 2 seasons. And I think that's a little bit better of a pill to swallow in that scenario. And I think you could look at Davante Adams and say, all right, I don't have to spend 100 million. I can only spend, 40 million. I'm going to get 2 really good years out of Davante Adams. I feel like he kind of fits a major need in a couple different ways where we really struggled to get off of man coverage, especially when Christian Watson was out. All right, well, he is a one-man, man-to-man nuclear warhead that will take out any man-to-man coverage in and of himself. And you're also kind of looking for that guy that you can trust in big moments. He slots into that number 1 role and then kind of solidifies and clicks everything else into place after that. So I think there are ways, like, for example, again, I don't think this is the way that Green Bay is going to go, but you could look at reunions with like Davante Adams and Rasul Douglas and be like, hey, these are good free agent signings that are very, very easily going to help us over the next 2 seasons that don't tie us into some major down the road contracts. And I think that also could make some sense if you're looking to say like, hey, at some point we're going to have to give Zach Tom a big contract. We're going to have to make decisions on Jaden Reed and some of the receivers. We're going to have to give Tucker Kraft a big contract. We're going to have to, like, you get the point, right? You're going to have to give Edgerrin Cooper, not for a while yet, but you're going to have to give Edgerrin Cooper a big deal at some point. Evan Williams down the road and those sort of things. Like, you're going to have to give some of these players some big contracts down the road. So tying a bunch of money into a 4 or 5 year deal may not be exactly what Green Bay wants, unless there is that perfect fit, which if there's not, then you look at either a tier down. But again, I don't know that a Malcolm Kuntz or a DJ Reed or somebody like that completely gets you to that next level. So then do you look at that next tier in a different way and say, I still want a premium player? Or maybe again, look at a Devontae Adams and a Khalil Mack. Like, to me, that would be a pretty awesome freaking offseason. Not what I usually like to do. All right. If you're telling me about a 33-year-old wide receiver, 34-year-old edge rusher, not normally my cup of tea in any capacity. Don't sign me up for that. I don't want that usually, almost ever. But if you have the money to spend, right, and there's not that premium player that, and you have to give to a DJ Reed or a Milton Williams or somebody like that in this free agent class, you're going to have to give a premium contract to get in a player that's probably not a premium player. I have less interest in that and would probably rather give 2 pretty strong contracts on 2-year deals to Khalil Mack and Devontae Adams to bring in a veteran who fits a perfect need at pass rusher along the defensive front. That's going to give you some veteran experience. Who's going to want to come in and win a Super Bowl. That's going to be ultra hungry. I'm kind of cool with that. And if it doesn't work out, it's not this 4 or 5 year deal. And the same thing with Devontae Adams, right? He's going to be super hungry. He wants to win a Super Bowl. He's, again, motivated by that. He's going to be a veteran in that wide receiver room, somebody who can mentor a Dontavian Wicks. Again, 2-year deal, going to give him some significant money, but you open up a window for the next 2 seasons where you've got all of this super young, exciting talent, but now you're adding in a couple of veterans that are ultra hungry, that are going to be, again, good locker room additions. And that, to me, probably makes a little bit more sense. Again, I would tell you, and if you've ever listened to me on off-season stuff in the past, that's usually not a direction that I want to go in. But I think with this free agency class, with this team where it is, youngest team in the league, adding a couple of veterans and spending some money where, again, you're not giving these 4 or 5 year deals. It's probably closer to 1 or 2 year deals for those guys. That to me could make some serious sense, and I think could add 2 big time players that are still playing some really, really good football. Again, Khalil Mack was a 90.2 grade this past year per PFF. And again, I'll have to go back and watch the tape before I feel super convinced of, doing something in that direction. Devontae Adams was still a 75.8, a 79.1 the year before that. And I would be willing to tell you that in all likelihood, there was probably a lot of poor quarterback play, specifically with the Raiders, and even some of that time with the Jets that kind of went into that as well. If you got a little bit better quarterback play with a little bit better team, those grades probably go up as well. So again, not what I would normally do, but kind of don't hate that for Green Bay this offseason. Given that Tucker Kraft addressed the lack of urgency in the locker room and Matt LaFleur's calls for leadership that is missing, do you think that we underestimated a veteran presence in our offense? No, because I do think Josh Jacobs really, kind of helped solidify that a little bit. Could they have used? So here's one thing that Green Bay has done really great, usually a great job with in the past, is usually they have one veteran in each room. Usually there's a veteran quarterback, even if it's a backup. And I don't know, maybe Jordan just qualifies as a veteran quarterback at this point. They do have the veteran running back in Josh Jacobs. They did not have a veteran wide receiver. They did not have a veteran tight end. They have Elton Jenkins along the offensive line. I would argue, certainly Kenny Clark on the defensive line. In the edge rush room, you could probably argue, well, they had Preston Smith, and I think Rashawn Gary's probably to that point. Eric Wilson at linebacker. Jaire Alexander was certainly kind of supposed to be that at corner, and then Xavier McKinney at safety. So I think there were enough veterans overall in this team, and in most rooms. Wide receiver probably could have used one. Tight end probably could have used one. But again, you don't just sign a veteran just for the sake of signing a veteran. But they probably could have used a little bit more of that. I don't think it's ultimately what did them in or anything, but they probably could have used a little bit more veteran experience in that room. Matthew, good afternoon to you as well. Wonder if the new defensive line coach will make a difference. Maybe, maybe not. Usually tough to say. I would be stunned or pretty surprised if all of a sudden, they brought in a new defensive line coach and all of a sudden Kenny Clark and Devontae Wyatt and Rashawn Gary and LVN just started playing like Pro Bowl and all pro players. I don't think that's going to be the case, but I do think too many guys took a step down last year. And I do think maybe the right coach can get the most out of them. And hey, sometimes it does work that way. If you don't think some of these high-end offensive line coaches over the years, Dante Scarnecchia, Howard Mudd, the dude that's in Philly, if you don't think some of those guys get the most out of their offensive lines and really bring them to another level, you'd be mistaken. And so maybe they can find that defensive line coach who really knows how to harness all of the talent of a Devontae Wyatt and an LVN and a Rashawn Gary and really unlock them and show them how to really win at a high level. Not super likely, but it's not impossible either. All right. Going to go to the super chats here. Mirko, I'm all for adding a wide receiver in free agency, but please not another Devin Funchess or Sammy Watkins signing. Yeah, that's fair. And again, to be fair, those were what I think Devin Funchess was a 1 year, $2 million deal, and maybe would have worked better had it not been for the COVID situation. And Sammy Watkins was, I think, something pretty similar. Those were bottom of the tier, wide receiver signings. But yeah, you can't bring in a guy like that and expect it to make an impact. If you want to add some competition to the bottom of that wide receiver room and bring in somebody like that, fine, whatever. It's not a huge deal. But if you're thinking that that's going to be the addition, yeah, then you've mistaken for what you should be doing in that situation. If Green Bay dealt with 69's injuries, why not do the same with 23? He's way younger than Bak was at the time. It would hurt to see all pro 23 on Minnesota, Chicago, or Detroit. I don't think you can think about it that way, Brett. I don't think you view it in any way, shape, or form. Also, Bak's situation was different in the fact that the way that the contract was set up and like the feel that they were going to be able to get him back. And then they kind of kept kicking the can of like restructuring his contract, which made it so that you could not, there was never really a point in Bakhtiari's deal because of some of the stuff that they kept doing to restructure and get money back, that it made very clear and obvious sense to move on until they actually moved on, which they did this past offseason, which was when it finally made sense. So as soon as it made sense financially for them to move on, and there was the clear indicator of like, all right, like it's time, they immediately did so. With Jaire, again, you can't look at Bakhtiari's and say, you have to use that as any sort of, indicator or what they should or shouldn't do. I also think that you can't be afraid that they go to Minnesota, Detroit, or Chicago. You can't guess where a player is going to go, and you can't base it off of that. You have to do what's best for the Green Bay Packers. And how I would say the multitude of reasons to move on here, the first one, and again, could you look at a restructure? Maybe, but I don't think Ja and his agents are going to have much to do with it. And I think they're going to just want to say, we're ready for something new. So if there's a restructure possibility, maybe. I just don't see that coming to fruition. So put that aside for a moment. Green Bay, one more year of Jaire Alexander is $17.5 million more dollars. And you might say, well, Andy, I heard if they cut him, they only save $7 million. They only save $7 million this year, and then they save over $10 million in future salary cap hits. If they add Jaire to one more year, let's say he just plays one more year, they cut him next year, whatever, they trade him next year. If he just plays one more year, Green Bay will take on contract as is $17.5 million in additional salary cap hits in totality. There is zero way that you can look at a player that has missed half of his games over a 4-year period and say $17.5 million is a good investment. And here's the thing. If he played every single game this year, you are paying him over $1 million per game on a $17.5 million contract. Over $1 million per game. Now, I guess a little bit less than that if you're, making it deep into the playoffs and he plays 20 games. But assuming like that would be pretty crazy if he all of a sudden played 17 games next year. So right, we'll just put it at that. We'll pay it at about $1 million per game. If he plays 8 games, you're paying him over $2 million per game. And that's what you have to go into this season saying, yeah, we can probably only expect that he's going to play in 7-8 games, might sit out all of our important ones and the playoffs. And there's no way that you can make that investment and say 17.5 makes sense. But you might say, Andy, look at the cornerback room, and Jaire's an all-pro when he's out. He's not. He is very clearly not. And I'll stand by that all day, every day. He is a darn good cover corner. I will stand by that as well. He is one of the top 15, top 10, top 15, 12, somewhere in there, cover corners in this league. You could go higher than that if you wanted to, maybe top 8, maybe top 7, 6, 5. If you really wanted to be aggressive and he had a really good season. On the whole, he is no longer in that echelon. Go to the Philly game in week 1 this year where A.J. Brown and that Philadelphia Eagles offense completely nuked him for a good chunk of that day. Not a great day. Not something you see from an all-pro corner. Go back the last 3 years when he has been playing. Solid cover corner. Really is. Not denying that. Not a good tackler. Not a good run defender. Add in the fact that he was suspended last year. Again, has missed 50% of the games over the last 4 years. You're not getting the ROI that you're expecting even when he is out there. And he's not talking to the media at the end of the year because he has nothing good to say. I mean, there's more, guys, there's more than enough smoke here, right? Like we're not we're not nitpicking one thing. We're not saying, well, yeah, it's just that he has a big contract. It's that he has a big contract. He hasn't lived up to it when he's been on the field. He can't stay on the field for 4 consecutive years, missing 50% of the time. And there seems to be far and enough, tension between the Packers and Jaire Alexander to also have that aspect of it. So you're talking about locker room stuff. You're talking about salary cap stuff. You're talking about on the field stuff, and you're talking about injury stuff. You are literally going 4 for 4 in ways to get cut from a team or moved on from a team. I mean, that's the perfect storm. Not living up to a contract, not being able to stay on the field, off-field / locker room concerns, and injury issues. Injury issues, play on the field, play off the field, and I don't know even what the other one. I've lost my train of thought, but you get my point. You're literally striking out everywhere. So no, I do not know how Green Bay could continue with that. And yes, I fully understand, Brett, that there's a world in which Jaire Alexander goes to Brian Flores' defense in Minnesota next year, plays 17 games, and in that system looks like an all-pro and plays the best season of his career. Probably happens, right? But that's not what you can base the decision off of. He could easily as well sign with the Chargers and play in 5 games next year. And you're like, whew, dodged a bullet there. And all you have to do is make the decision based on the evidence that you have, not conjecture of what could happen. What do you know? What do you know? You know that he hasn't been able to stay on the field. You know he hasn't been the same guy out there, that he can't really run, defend, or be a really good tackling corner anymore. That, again, he hasn't covered the way that you would totally expect him to. That is a huge salary cap hit, and that there's been some locker room concerns. So that was the other one. Money, injury, on field, off the field. That's the 4 for 4. That's where I was at. So to me, that's what you have to base it on. I will be very surprised if Jaire is back on this team. Not stunned / shocked, not fall out of my chair. Oh my God, I cannot believe it. He's under contract. He's still a good player. He's still a good corner, good cover corner. So I understand it to some extent. I would be very, very surprised. All right. Do you think they move Zach Tom to left tackle next year? I do not. I think anything's possible. I think you could see Zach Tom at left tackle if there was an injury to Rasheed Walker. I don't think they're going to do a bunch of musical chairs, especially because they might already need to move Elton Jenkins to center and Sean Ryan to left guard and Jordan Morgan to right guard. There could be enough. I don't think you want to go all of a sudden Zach Tom at left tackle, playing next to Sean Ryan at left guard, and now both of your guys have switched from right to left. Now all of a sudden Elton's playing center and Jordan Morgan's playing right guard, and either now Rasheed's moved from left to right, or you've got a new right tackle in there. I don't think you want to go 5 for 5 on musical chairs. My guess is that Zach Tom will be at right tackle next year. Not impossible. Injuries or if they find a unbelievable right tackle in the draft or an unbelievable right tackle in free agency that they want to bring to the team and it just makes sense to do so. All right, then let's see where Zach Tom fits best. Do you want to put him at center? Do you want to put him at left tackle? You'll have some decisions at that point. But I would, if I were betting today, I think it's most likely that Zach Tom is at right tackle starting next year. And then if injuries happen, you might have to adjust. All right, a couple more super chats, then I do have to get out of here. Are you feeling better or worse heading into the offseason compared to this time last year? Worse, but not exponentially so. I do think, man, it's really, really tough, even for somebody like me who takes a very step back, full picture approach. It's really, really tough not to have a bit of a sour taste in your mouth about the offense, and particularly Jordan Love in those final few games of the season. Just really didn't look comfortable. I finally finished grading the offensive tape for this one, and there were just multiple really, I'm not even talking about injuries for Jordan. I'm not even talking about like a bad throw or an inaccurate throw, just really bad decisions from Jordan. Like the picture perfect one. And we'll talk about this on the grades for tomorrow as well. So I probably shouldn't spoil it here, but go back and watch. I'll talk about it tomorrow a little bit more. Go back and watch the injury to Romeo Doubs on that play and Jordan Love's decision on that play. Go back and look at that one. We'll talk about it tomorrow, but just some really bad decision-making and just not seeing the field great. That gives me some legitimate cause for concern. It's really, really tough to win in this league if you don't have a consistently good top 10 quarterback, especially when you're paying him like a top 5 quarterback, right? I'm not worried about that. I still have a lot of faith in Jordan. I think he can still be a really good quarterback. But at this point last year, going into the offseason, I felt like, oh, they found their dude. Like there was really not a ton of question to me. I still think that that's the case, but there are just a couple little gray clouds hovering over me right now of like, just a couple things that I saw where I'm like, does give me a little bit cause for concern. Could have been injuries, could have been rhythm, could have been lack of practice time. Poor wide receiver play and separation played a factor in it. Offensive line against Philly very much played a factor in it. I am in no way, shape, or form giving up on Jordan Love. I think he's a good quarterback. I think he has the ability to be a great quarterback, but can he get there consistently? And can he do it in the totality of 2025? Now I have a few more questions. So because I have quarterback, just even a few, just poking quarterback questions, that gives me a little bit more cause for concern than where I was this past year. I still think he overcomes it. I think he's going to have a really good 2025, but that's the difference for me. They have salary cap money to spend. They have a really good core to their team. I think they still have the foundation that they need. I still think these are normal situations where sometimes you take a step forward, then a step back just to take 2 steps forward. I think that's all very normal, but now there's just a few of those, again, lingering questions out there about the offense, Jordan Love, Matt LaFleur, and those sort of things, just because of the bad taste in your mouth at the end of this season left. And I get that it's probably shouldn't just be based on those few games, but man, I'm telling you, and I'm sure some of you guys feel it as well, it's really, really hard sometimes. It's really hard. And listen, just like how last year, like you ended up on this up arrow and things look good, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's just going to continue going up. And we saw that this year. It doesn't just go straight line up, right? And just where things like kind of are feeling trending down, it doesn't mean that we get to 2025 and things keep trending down. But just a few additional questions that I had, at this point where I didn't have those last year. Someone tells Sherman to shut up. He's crazy. What did Sherman say? Now I want to know what Sherman said. Richard Sherman. I didn't know if there was somebody named Sherman in the chat. I will say this. He's loud. He does have a non-Packers bias. But what I will say about this is what he was saying about feeling at times like Green Bay didn't trust Jordan, or like that he was, kind of handcuffed a little bit. Did get a little feel for that as well. Just a little. I'm not to his extent, not enough to in that overall direction, but just a little bit of a feeling like at times that they just needed to let Jordan rip. It felt very similar to the beginning of 2023 until they opened up the offense for Jordan, and then he kind of crushed it. It felt like there were times where, and I think Jordan has some blame in this as well, where when they did allow him to open up the offense, he didn't kind of hit his drops and let it rip either. So I think they were looking for something to just kind of get the offense going. It did feel a little micromanagey at times. I think there's some things that they have to clean up in that regard, but it's certainly not to the level of what Richard Sherman has been saying. It's the crossbody throw to Wilson, who's completely covered, stepping up in the pocket while Musgrave is open in front of him. That concerns me. There's that. And if you go back and watch that, I'll just go over it quick. On the Romeo Doubs play where he throws a jump ball to Romeo Doubs into double coverage, Josh Jacobs is on the swing pass, wide open, calling for the ball, and he's going to get massive yardage on that play. And after the play, you could tell, I think it was the first time I really saw anything from Jacobs in a game where he's like, what the hell are you doing? Like, you could tell in that moment, Josh Jacobs was like, I'm literally chilling here, wide ass open for a significant gain. And you're going to throw into double coverage for a jump ball to Romeo Doubs. And it was just that, it was that sort of stuff for Jordan where he just wasn't seeing it or feeling it. And there was a lot of opportunities. The Wilson one's a great example as well. Like, you just take your 5 yards and slide, dude, or whatever it would have ended up being. And instead you're going to do a bizarro sidearm throw to Emmanuel Wilson, who's covered on the play, who, even if he catches it, is nowhere near going to get the yardage that you would if you just stepped up and slid in however many yards you could get. There was just things like that were a little bit, left me questioning some things, not jumping to any conclusions. Jordan's going to be fine. I really, truly believe that. But just a couple things like that just left just those little, like, they poke at you. You're like, you don't want to see those things, of course. Jack Sawyer round 1, Trey Amos round 2. Thank you. We'll get into all the draft stuff. Ian, Andy, if I told you the Packers took a big swing in free agent, what position do you think they would do it with? I want Mac, and we know Goot likes him. Thank you. Yeah, I still think pass rusher is the biggest one. I still don't know that there's a 1A perfect, match like we kind of talked about going into this at the beginning. But pass rusher to me is number one, and then corner, O-line. and wide receiver are kind of mashed up in that next group after that. So pass rusher still one. And yeah, Khalil Mack, as we kind of talked about a little bit earlier, does make a lot of sense. All right, I do got to get out of here. Just running a couple minutes late. I appreciate you guys a ton. Thank you for the super chats. Plan on continuing happy hours moving forward. So keep an eye out for those. Pack-A-Day lives will probably go away for a little bit. Still members only Q&As. So if you want to make sure you're getting a members chat or these sort of Q&As every week, make sure you're signing up for a Pack-A-Day podcast membership, which will get you access to those members Q&A every single week, 52 weeks a year, no matter what. So unless I'm sick, which I did miss 1 week, my apologies for that. But outside of that, you will get one of those every single week. I am going to be doing one specifically for Hall of Fame and All-Pro members as a bonus one coming up as well. So if you're thinking of it, if you're on the fence, hey, maybe I should become an All-Pro or Hall of Fame member, now would be a good time because I do want to do a live one with just some of our All-Pro and Hall of Fame members as well. So make sure to check that out. Thank you to all of you. Appreciate all the support. My balls itch really quick. I was talking to my brother. His balls itch. Oh man, thank you for that. And we both agree with the draft in Green Bay, the chances of Sharp and or Holmgren getting in the Hall of Fame. What are your thoughts? I hope so. I hope so. They're definitely deserving. I'd like to see Brian Bulaga announce that 23rd pick as well. And now granted, who knows if they actually stay at pick 23, but that'd be cool too if they did stay at pick 23. All right, friends, I do have to get out of here. Thank you so much for all the super chats. Thank you for being you. Thank you for supporting the channel. You're the absolute best. I love you all. Until next time. And as always, go Pack Go.